Hi everyone, welcome to our second webinar of 2019. I'm Jean Rogers, your host and head of the Children's Screen Time Action Network. And before I introduce our presenters this evening, I'm going to go to Sam for some housekeeping tips on our Zoom webinar tonight.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for our March webinar. We're so glad to see you here. If you've never joined us before, I'm just going to give a few housekeeping tips for how this is going to work. So our webinar is scheduled from 7 to 8 p.m., but our presenters have kindly offered to stay on for an extra 15 minutes for those of you who have some really great questions, and I'm sure you will have great questions. We always do. If you want to ask a question, make sure you use the Q&A function and not the chat box. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get to every single one of your questions, but please send us your questions. Even if we can't get to them, we appreciate every single one of them. And I will turn it back over to Jean.
Thanks, Sam. And I just wanted to let everyone know that this evening we're with two of my favorite people. We're live with you from the home of Dr. Susan Linn, founder of CCFC, and with Josh Golin, Executive Director of CCFC. And my introduction to Susan, let me start by saying I'm a mom of twin boys and a daughter, and I read her book, Consuming Kids. It was life-changing for me. So I was buying them the Spider-Man. I was buying everything, Susan, really. I was buying the Spider-Man toothbrushes, and I was buying the Star Wars Lego kits. I can't tell you how many. Probably.
I still like you, Jean.
And, my daughter Kate was Disney princess all the way. And my eyes were open like I think yours will be this evening. Susan Linn is a lecturer at Boston Children's Hospital at Harvard, and she's the author of, as I said, Consuming Kids. She's internationally known about her puppet work with puppet therapy with children's psychotherapy. And she is, as I said, the founder of Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. We're honored to have you here this evening with us.
I'm so happy to be back with CCFC again.
Thanks, Susan. And Josh Golin, Executive Director of CCFC. Josh started with CCFC as an intern in 2003. So we're going to talk to Josh a little bit about how things have changed. Josh is a fearless advocate. I see this every day in my work, that he's been able to take on companies, corporations like Mattel, like Facebook, like YouTube, and I know all of you appreciate the work that he does at Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood. So Susan, I'd like to start by directing our first question to you. You founded CCFC in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. Why? Tell us what is wrong with advertising to children. Most of us have no idea.
Well, as we say on Passover, I'm glad you asked that question. My thinking about this has actually changed a little bit. So when I used to be asked about what's wrong with marketing to kids, what I would say is, and I believe this, is that what research tells us is that advertising and marketing to children is a factor in so many of the problems facing children today. Childhood obesity, eating disorders, precocious sexuality, youth violence, family stress, the erosion of creative play, which is certainly near and dear to my heart, not the erosion, the play. But recently, what I've been thinking a lot about is materialism and materialistic values and consumption. And one ad is promoting a particular product, but an aggregate of ads, the number of advertising of all sorts that children see today is just, it's phenomenal. It follows them everywhere. And really what it is propaganda for consumption. And so a couple of days ago, we had children all over the world marching for the environment and for climate change. And then 3 weeks before that, the American Toy Association gave LOL dolls, which are just all about plastic wrapping and plastic, the Toy of the Year award. So, while kids are concerned about the environment, they're being sold consumption and that they can't have satisfying lives unless they have the things that corporations sell. So it's sort of even bigger than I used to think it was.
I was, yeah.
Sure.
Concerned.
And
Josh, go ahead.
I think what Susan just said is such an important point about it's not about one ad. Because certainly there are tons and tons of terrible ads that are aimed at children. Where either that the message of the ad is bad, that you can't be cool, or you can't be popular unless you own this product, or the product itself is bad, whether it's a junk food or a doll like Barbie or Bratz that promotes really gender stereotypes. But it really is much more than about the individual ads and the individual bad ads. It's that children are taught by their immersion in consumer culture that nothing is enough. Everything that is designed for children through media and marketing is to sell them on something else. And so if a child loves Paw Patrol, right? Every episode of Paw Patrol is an ad for that Paw Patrol backpack, which is an ad for the Paw Patrol fruit snacks, which is an ad for the Paw Patrol sheets, which is an ad for the shirt, which is an ad for the show. And so children are constantly getting the message that what they have, that who they are, is not enough. And that's such a damaging message, both for the child itself, and as I think as Susan mentioned, for us as a society, particularly at this moment where we face huge environmental challenges. And I would say the other thing that's so concerning about advertising to children is that children are not miniature adults. They are so vulnerable to advertising, and that's how this advertising is designed to take advantage of their developmental vulnerabilities. So I think one thing that so many of us have noticed about ads is the gendering that it takes place in advertising. So where boys get sold violence and toughness, and girls get sold to focus on their appearance and pink, and all the things that we thankfully we're talking a lot more about lately in terms of the gender divide in advertising. But one thing that's important to understand with that is that plays on a natural developmental stage that children have. They like to sort things into categories. Gender and labeling things, boy things and girl things, is something that's a natural thing that many children do. But the advertising is taking that and twisting that to make you then have to buy 2 sets of Legos, or to make you have to buy 2 different shirts because you can't hand me down the boy shirt to the girl shirt. And so, part of what's wrong with the advertising is the messages that happen in the advertising, and part of it is that it's fundamentally unfair to manipulate children in order to sell things.
Yeah, and also the fundamental message of advertising is that the things we buy will make us happy, right? I mean, Josh sort of alluded to that, but it's a false message, because what research tells us is that the things we buy don't make us happy. And so for corporations, that works out really well, because if you believe that things are happy, what do? You buy a thing. And then it doesn't make you happy, but you believe things will make you happy. And so you buy another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And what people who study happiness and materialistic values find is that people who believe that things will make them happy, who are more materialistic, are actually less happy. So we're raising children, and one of the things that's changed now is that the marketing was terrible when I was writing Consuming Kids, which was 2004. But now it's even more pervasive. It's even more subtle, and as kids are involved with screens even more than they were 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, they're constantly getting this message, and it's a false message, and it's one that is purposely designed to inculcate discontent.
Susan, can you say a little bit more about how children are particularly vulnerable? We are all vulnerable to what you're saying, to wanting things and to believing that will cause us happiness, create happiness for us, but how are children particularly vulnerable?
So, and it breaks my heart that psychologists work, I'm a psychologist, that psychologists work with marketing companies to exploit children's developmental vulnerabilities. So very young children can't distinguish between a commercial and an ad, except now I can't distinguish between a commercial and an ad because every program is actually an ad for stuff. So that's part of it. Until the age about 11 or 12, kids can't really understand persuasive intent. They can't really understand that every part of an ad is designed to make them do something that they very well might not ordinarily do. So, kids are, they have less defenses around their emotions, and marketing targets emotions. It doesn't target intellect, it targets emotions. And also kids are, especially as they get a little older, they're more vulnerable to peer pressure. Very young children, sort of have a hard time sorting out reality and fantasy, so they tend to believe what they see. I mean, this is the first time in history that kids are immersed in a culture created by people who don't know them and don't really care about them. All the time that kids are spending with screens, most of it is being spent actually the people who made the products who don't know the kids and really don't care about them.
This is really why I love CCFC, Susan, because as a parent, I'm going to just go to what you said about how ads play on our emotions. And as a parent, the ads were playing on my emotions too. And I think a lot of young parents joining us, we might love Thomas the Tank Engine, or we might be really fond of those characters that we read to our kids about. And then the advertisers are going to grab our emotions as well.
Television media characters are incredibly powerful. And, when I was a kid, there were two media characters that I just adored. One, Flash Gordon, that really tells you how old I am, but also Peter Pan. And both of those, and my friends and I used to play Flash Gordon and Peter Pan. And I sort of try to think about, well, what's the difference today? Because it's not that the characters, most of them themselves, are terrible, and some of them are quite wonderful, actually. But it's that that it's access. That I saw Peter Pan once in a movie theater. Flash Gordon was on television once a year. So if I wanted to engage with those characters, I had to play about them. I had to use my imagination. And that's not the case anymore. If kids want to engage with, Elsa from Frozen, they can just, go on a screen and find it, or they have all the toys, things like that. So they're not relying on themselves and their capacity to invent.
Creativity. Josh, can you tell us a little bit, I'm going to go to you, about what Susan's talking about, where ads, children can't tell the difference between an ad and a TV program, and we were just able to go turn that TV off. What are the exposures kids have to ads now? Why are those techniques more insidious than they were when they were on TV?
Sure. So I think, when I started at CCFC in 2003, we were primarily concerned about television commercials. And that, that almost seems quaint at this point. Because television commercials come at a very particular time. They cue you that they're coming. They cue you when they're going back to the show. They're separate. But what we see today is, first of all, it's not limited to where the television is, because kids now carry their screens around with them, whether it's a tablet or a phone. They are now consuming media just about any time during the day, and that means they're consuming advertising just about any time during the day. But I think the other big change that's happened is what Susan alluded to before, is we've seen on the internet a complete there's no separation between what we would call programming and advertising on the internet. The programs themselves that kids are consuming are often just really long advertisements. One of the most popular genres on YouTube are what are called unboxing videos. Now, if you're not familiar with unboxing videos, what these are videos often 12 to 15 minutes long, where a kid talks really excitedly and opens a toy, and that's their video. And I think these things actually started somewhat organically with parents filming their children opening toys because it was exciting to watch kids open toys. But what happened is this became an incredibly popular genre on YouTube. And so now what we have is toy companies and marketers seeking out these kids and their families in order to pay them to talk about toys and to open them. And so now what kids are consuming on YouTube, instead of consuming a 22-minute program that has 8 minutes of ads, they're consuming a 15-minute infomercial for a toy that their parents don't even know is an infomercial for a toy. They just think it's some cute kid on screen talking about a toy.
I was talking to a mom who has a 3-year-old who the 3-year-old's grandparents showed her unboxing videos, and now the mom said that I can't take her anywhere. She just wants everything. And the other thing that's happened is now everywhere you go there are things to buy, which wasn't the case before. So if you go to a children's entertainment place or a children's play place, there's stuff to buy, or there's stores, or gymnastics, there's a store in the lobby and things like that. And so I think we forget sometimes how powerful screen media is for kids, and how compelling it is, and how really what kids learn from it are values, habits, and behaviors. And the unboxing videos, I've unfortunately for me been looking at a lot of them recently. They're all about consumption. I mean, they're not called toy videos, they're called unboxing videos. They're about opening up the packaging. And the most important thing is finding what it is. It's not even about playing anymore, it's about consumption.
Absolutely.
And I think along with that, what's really concerning, and obviously the conversation we've been having as a culture the last year since the Cambridge Analytics scandal about privacy, but the fact that now it's not only just that we're getting delivered ads through our devices, but our devices are tracking us and collecting information in order to deliver personalized marketing to us. Now, you're not supposed to be allowed to do that with a child. There's actually a law, the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act, that makes it illegal to collect personal information from a child without getting permission. But a study last year out of the University of Cal Berkeley showed that 57% of children's apps are sharing children's personal information with third parties. So there's just a widespread ignoring of the law, and what that means is that children's, what they like, what they're watching, who they're attached to, is getting is being used then to market back to them. Now, if children are vulnerable to a television commercial, imagine how vulnerable they are when an algorithm figures out what their likes and dislikes are and targets advertising directly to that child based on those interests.
I think this can be somewhat overwhelming for some of our young parents who are joining us, or for our pediatricians, our psychologists who are working with young parents. And could you say a little bit more, both of you, about the normalcy of advertising? Susan mentioned Elsa. My big pet peeve is the Elsa Pop-Tarts. That it's just everywhere. And we're concerned about their privacy, we're concerned about the manipulation, but what does policy and regulation have to do with this? Can you talk a little bit about deregulation?
Sure. I think one of the things that happens with the story of children and advertising is that it gets told as this was inevitable, that this is the march of progress, that the iPhone is just the natural result of human ingenuity, and technology is a constant march forward. But when you think about the commercialization of childhood and the messages that kids are getting, and how they're being completely immersed in this idea that consumption is the key to happiness and healthy relationships, this lie that marketing sells us, there are some key policy moments and some key policy choices that were made that made this all possible. So one of the seminal moments was, in fact, in the late 70s and early 80s, the Federal Trade Commission held a series of hearings looking at advertising to children. And at the time, the concern was cavities and sugary cereal. And the Federal Trade Commission looked at all the developmental science and all the research, and they did something which was really, really amazing and remarkable for a government agency at the time. They recommended a ban on all advertising to children 8 and under, and a ban on all sugary cereals, marketing sugary cereals to kids 12 and under. And what happened at the time is the industries that would have been affected, the TV broadcasters, the cereal makers, the toy manufacturers, went ballistic. And they went to Congress, and they had a lot of money, and they threw money at Congress, and Congress completely sided with the business interests over the public interest, and they actually defunded the FTC briefly until the FTC backed off this proposal. And what that did was open the floodgates. It said that, you know what, we're not going to regulate marketing to children in the way that we used to. We're not going to start talking about things like bans. And in fact, I meet with the Federal Trade Commission, a couple times a year, and every time I go in and meet with them, they're still talking about what happened almost 40 years ago. It's an institution that has institutional trauma. And so in the absence of regulation, what we started to see was marketers realizing, wow, this is a really profitable area to target children.
And as if that weren't bad enough, in 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected. Well, he was elected president, and there was a lot of deregulation going on of all sorts of industries. And he forced the Federal Communications Commission to deregulate children's television. And so it became okay to create a television program for the sole purpose of selling ads. So we have really been, in a time, and what was happening at the same time was that the technology was changing. It was VCRs, and then, moving to computers and phones and all that. So the technology made the marketing more enticing and more pervasive. At the same time that, there was this whole love of deregulation and some fantasy that corporations were going to police themselves, which, of course, they don't.
And having said all that deregulation that happened, even with that, we still have some rules on children's television for how you can advertise to a kid. So you can't have product placement on children's television. You can't have what's called host selling, where the host of a program is directly selling a product to children. But we don't have those same rules to apply to the internet. And in fact, so much of what we see on the internet would not be allowed on children's television. So those unboxing videos that we talked about would not be allowed on children's television, but they're allowed on the internet, which is, ridiculous that we have one set of rules based on what screen a child is watching a video on. And in fact, nowadays, so many people are watching YouTube on their actual television, so it might even be the same screen. But the fact that it's coming over YouTube as opposed to coming over Nickelodeon allows marketers to target kids in even more insidious ways. That's really unfair to them.
So I think, Josh, we want to know what we can do about it. I think we have a lot of parents with us, or we have a lot of researchers also who understand that in European countries and South American countries that there are regulations, and if I'm feeling as a parent as though regulation's not on my side anymore, I can't go to the FTC like you can. So what can we do about it?
Well, I think, Josh, you're going to talk about policy and things like that. Political change, any kind of political social change, takes time, but there are things that parents can do. One thing that parents of babies can do is not buy into the false message that watching videos is educational for them, or that being on iPads is educational for them. Really, it probably isn't. And parents can set limits. They can set limits around screen time, and they can also make sure we can't count on children having commercial free time and space anymore. The default is that they are, being bombarded with commercials. That's the default. So again, for the first time in history, parents really have to make sure that their kids have time to play creatively, have time to play with other kids, have time to play with toys that are not media linked or that aren't on a screen. So, and the other thing that parents can do is look at their own consumption and especially their own time on screens, because kids do look to us, to be models. But I think that what you and I both agree on, we agree on most things. Actually, it's nice to be sitting here talking with you. But one family in isolation can't combat, this, huge, zillion-dollar industry, and that's why we need to work for regulation. We need to keep working for regulation.
Yeah, and I would just to add one thing more about in terms of what we can do at home. When we were talking about these characters that play such a powerful role in children's lives, I think one of the things that we do as adults sometimes is we say, that Elsa who's on the package of the fruit snacks or who's on the backpack, that's not the real Elsa, right? We distinguish between the characters that we like and the way they appear in films.
She's not the real Elsa.
and versus the shells that we see on the side of packages. But of course, to children, there's no separation. Like Elsa is Elsa, whether she's in the movie or on a backpack or a fruit snack. And so I think as much as we can, as much as it can be difficult particularly for low-income families, because cheap products tend to come with characters. But the more we can resist, even if our kids see these movies or see these shows and love these characters, the more we can resist buying these products, which in and of themselves are ads, I think the better off our kids will be.
Also we don't, people sometimes say, well, what am I supposed to do, move to the woods? I didn't move to the woods. I shouldn't be, I'm not advocating that, but you can set limits. If you want to take your child to a movie, you can say, we're going to go to the movie, but I'm going to tell you ahead of time, I'm not going to buy anything from the movie, or I'm going to buy one thing, but not all of the things. And one of the problems is, of course, that companies really want kids to nag, and they encourage kids to nag, and kids are really good at nagging. And I was talking to a mom who...
They are.
Yes, and I was talking to a mom she's great, and she's really into social justice and fairness, and her daughter, 7-year-old daughter, desperately wanted more LOL dolls, or an LOL doll. And so she said, Mom, LOL dolls are made by the Chinese, and it's really not fair to the Chinese for us not to buy one.
That's great.
So, it's hard to say no to our kids. We want them to be happy, but it's really important to set limits on it.
I think you've hit on one of my favorite parenting techniques, which is setting expectations. I think kids will rise to our expectations, and if we set those expectations ahead that we're not going to buy everything, but we are going to see the film, that they'll start getting used to that as sort of a family pattern. And Josh, I was going to ask you also if you would talk a little bit about the current CCFC campaign, so that our audience knows
Sure.
what we are doing now to support them, to help them continue.
Sure. So for those of you who only know us through the Action Network in this webinar series, the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood is the umbrella organization of the Children's Screen Time Action Network, and we do all sorts of campaigns against companies that we see that are doing some of the worst when it comes to marketing to kids, and we also advocate for policies, and on both fronts. It's a pretty exciting time. So, for instance, we have a campaign right now to get Google to clean up its App Store. So one of the things that researchers have discovered in research that came out in the last year was not only are most of the children's apps illegally sharing children's personal information with third parties and advertisers, but also that so many of the apps and that are in the Google Play Store are themselves just little ads. So they're like teasers for a full game, and so parents are told that these are free games, and then their kids download the games, and what happens is the games deliberately frustrate the kids so that they'll buy in-app purchases or a full version of the game. So there might be a game where there's a house and there's 10 rooms in the house, and you can only go into one room of the house, but you have to pay real money to go into the other 9 rooms of the house. That's unfair to a kid. It's unfair to frustrate a kid so that they can't complete a game unless they beg their parents for a purchase, or if they have access to the credit card.
It's unfair to parents too.
It's unfair to
everybody.
It's unfair to everybody. And so we filed a major complaint. We were joined by 18 other advocacy organizations in December. We filed this complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, and they're looking into that right now. So that's some of that's one way that we're trying to address this problem. The other thing that I am so excited about is last week, Senators Ed Markey and Josh Hawley, a Democrat and a Republican, which is pretty exciting in this day and age, introduced a bill that would significantly strengthen the laws around marketing to children. In fact, I would say it's by far the most significant legislation that's been introduced in more than 20 years. And what this bill would do is it would ban all targeted marketing to kids under 13. So that means if kids were online, if they were on an app, that you would not be able to use their browsing habits, their likes, their dislikes, any information that you collect from that child or watch that child doing while they're online, you would not be able to use that against them to then market to them. It would also add important privacy protections for teenagers. So right now the law treats a 13-year-old as if they're an adult when it comes to privacy online and marketing. And it would also create a new division at the Federal Trade Commission to actually enforce some of these laws, to give some teeth back to that regulation, all that deregulation that we were talking about earlier. This would be a step towards re-regulation. So this is
de-traumatizing them.
Yes. So I honestly, Susan and I used to say, I don't think Susan and I ever thought we would see a bill like this in our lifetimes when we were, when we were doing our planning and growing CCFC years ago. But this is a really, really important and exciting opportunity. And if you're, a member of CCFC, you'll be getting all sorts of updates about how you can get involved in helping us get this legislation passed, because it's widely considered that there will be some privacy legislation passed this year to given all the problems that there's been. But the question is it going to be real legislation that protects children, or is it going to be legislation that benefits Google and Facebook? And so this is really a pivotal moment.
Oh.
I think that what's really, what I think about when you're talking about that, and I'm so thrilled about this new bill, but advocacy takes time, but it's really, really, really important to keep at it. And it's true. I mean, we work for regulation because it's the right thing to do and it's what's needed. But we didn't envision that something like this could happen. So that's really exciting.
And I think that, one of the things that it's incumbent, everybody who's watching this webinar, who's concerned about commercialism, who's concerned about children's screen time, we have to advocate for the world that we want to see, and we also have to reduce the harm that's taking place right now. And I think that we have to do both. It's not like we can just advocate for this legislation and not give parents the tools and the tips that they need to deal with what's happening in their homes right now. And it's not like we can just do the tips and not advocate for the world that we want to see. So at CCFC, we believe strongly in doing both. And the network, we believe strongly in doing both. And one of the things that's so exciting about this network that we launched a year and a half ago is that we have so many activists who are now working together on projects to create a better childhood for all children, and not just looking for tips about what they can do in their own homes.
I know when I hear that from both of you that it gives me hope, and I'm hoping it does also for our viewers, and that they're going to want to join us at screentimenetwork.org and at Campaign for Commercial Free Childhood.org as well. And I'm going to go to Sam and see if we have
So one of the things I think that we didn't touch upon really in this so far is the relationship between commercialism and screen time.
Thank you, Josh.
So
Take it away.
Really? There's a relationship?
yes, which is,
Oh, tell us, Josh.
well, I thought you were going to start off.
Oh,
by telling
all right.
me.
Okay, I will. Basically, screens are the primary way that marketers reach kids, and we don't truly have public media in this country anymore. And so, even PBS, the shows are funded by marketing through licensing or sponsors, or whatever. So basically, there's almost nothing a child can do on a screen that isn't selling them something, and that's just heartbreaking. I mean, I grew up with a lot of hope for television. I worked with Fred Rogers, and the fact that he was in a Google commercial recently wasn't his fault. He's not alive. but kids deserve media that isn't selling them something, and the fact that everything is commercial is harmful to them.
And I think that, when we think about some of the problems that are so pernicious, and that we're all so concerned about with children's media, a lot of them can be traced to the fact that kids are on ad-supported platforms, that kids are on using ad-supported media. So just to give a couple of examples, on social media, right? One of the defining characteristics, if not the defining characteristics of social media, is that everything that we do is quantified on social media. So if I am a 11-year-old girl and I'm on Instagram and I post a picture of myself, I immediately get publicly rated on how I look in that picture, which is really, do I look hot as an 11-year-old? Do I look hot in that picture?
You don't mean sweating. You mean
Yeah, no, I don't mean sweating, unfortunately. We can look at that girl's picture and immediately know, is she popular? Does she have a lot of followers on Instagram or not? And of course, this is incredibly powerful to kids, right? They post things, and we hear all the time about kids post things to Instagram and they immediately delete them because they don't get enough likes right away, and they're constantly checking back and forth, and going back to see how many likes they got and how many friends they have. And this works. It works. It gets kids, it gets all of us as adults, right? Retweets, right? We're constantly checking our to see who's interacting with us online and who's giving us validation for what we said or what the picture that we posted. But that's not for our benefit. That's not for the benefit of kids. That's because it's really effective at getting us to look at social media and to check it all the time. And the reason they want us checking social media all the time, the reason they want our kids checking social media all the time, is so they can collect more data from them and so they can deliver more advertising to them. Another example would be YouTube, right? We've heard so much in just the last 3 weeks about YouTube recommending inappropriate content to kids. But if we were building an online video platform for kids, why would we even have recommendations? Why would we even have an algorithm suggesting, if you like this video, you should watch this one next? Actually, if we were designing it for kids' benefit, the video that a child was ending would end, and then we'd have a black screen for 5 minutes. So the kid would turn off the device and go do something else. And they wouldn't be, even on PBS, right? The shows end at 22 minutes after the hour on PBS Kids, and then they show 8 minutes of ads for other PBS shows. So again, teaching kids that show that they're watching is not enough. You have to watch all the other shows on PBS Kids. If we were designing media for kids, we wouldn't have this. All our media wouldn't be designed to hook us, to keep us checking again, to keep our eyeballs glued. It would actually be designed to help us turn it off. But advertisers would hate that, so of course that's not the way it's actually designed.
One thing that I do want to say for the parents who are watching and for the people who work with parents, we're not here to make you feel guilty. I mean, it's when I speak to groups of parents, their grandparents in the audience, they start looking really smug. The parents start looking really green, and it's really hard to be a parent today. And there's this industry that is really doing its best to undermine your best interest and your child's best interests. So it's hard. I just feel like we need to say that. And if you're feeling guilty, don't, please.
And I think if, and obviously if it's hard on parents, it's incredibly hard on kids too. And I think, we see a lot of articles about what's wrong with kids today, and kids they won't take their heads out of their phones, and what's wrong, what's wrong with these kids, and honestly, the kids are behaving the exact way that they should be behaving if you give them unregulated access to media, which isn't designed for their benefit.
Yeah. Also, I'm sorry, I just thought of this. I was walking in a park, and there was this mom looking at her phone, and there was a toddler pulling a big branch, and he said, "Mom, Mom." She said, "Uh-huh." He's, "Mom, Mom." She said, "Uh-huh." She said, "Mom, Mom." He was right up to her. She said, "Uh-huh, that's nice, dear." He slugged her. He shouldn't have slugged her, but still, really. You need to pay attention to your kids and not to your phone.
We absolutely do. I've had kids come to me and say, "I got a soccer goal. My mom missed it because she was texting." So I think that is a message that we all need to hear.
But I also think what you need to understand as parents too, that these same tricks are being used on us. And that, the reason we find our phones so compelling is because they have been deliberately engineered to be that compelling, because that's how they're going to make money off of us. And so I think it's not because we're weak. It really isn't because we're weak. It's because some of the world's most brilliant minds have used the most powerful technologies that have ever been developed in order to keep us glued to our phones. And so, and that's not to say that it's an excuse. That's not to say that we don't, it's okay if it shouldn't take being whacked with a stick in order to bring our attention back. But it is important to understand that these forces are working against us. They're working to make our lives harder as parents every single second.
And they're being marketed to us as though they're making our lives better and easier and more educational. That's how they're being marketed.
Yeah, and hopefully, you have a little bit more information tonight so that you feel not as hopeless about it, and that you know what CCFC and the network are doing to try to help. Sam, do we have questions from our viewers?
Yes, we do. Okay, so to start off, we have a great question from Melissa in Boston. There's a lot of talk about what parents can do for their kids, but what can communities do to give all kids commercial-free time and space?
Well, Screen-Free Week certainly comes to mind. Why don't you guys talk about that?
You want to go ahead?
I do. Screen-Free Week is coming up April 29th through May 5th. It's an annual celebration that we here host at CCFC, but it happens around the world. Schools and families just embrace that 1 week to take a break from all these screens, all these ads that we're talking about. And sometimes it helps families to create new patterns. It's often sponsored in schools where events are happening that are screen-free. Events that, we think about from our childhood, that young parents think about from their childhood. Bike-a-thons, reading aloud to each other, having siblings read aloud to each other. Anything you can think of, gardening, hikes, anything you can think of that would give you a break from screens. And sometimes we just need that line in the sand. We need someone to say, "Hey, this is the week, and we're all going to do it together globally." And it's a very exciting week. We feel the energy in the office when we unplug some from our screens and help those communities. There are great resources on screenfree.org. We have a lot of websites, so just trying to figure out which one. Resources that are translated into Spanish and to French now. Just French this year, we're excited to offer them, and communities and families and schools can use all those resources to have that 1 week and see what patterns we can create. Just be curious about what is life like without those screens.
And I would say, the idea behind Screen-Free Week, or part of the idea is coming together as a community. And so we're so thrilled that, it's not just that people do this as a family, but they do it as communities, and they hold these public events, and rediscover what it's like to interact with each other without their screens. But the idea behind that, coming together as a community is something that can be done all year round. And I think that, one of the really exciting developments of the past couple of years is that we've started to see a lot of community groups forming around healthy media use for children. So some people are doing the Wait Until 8th Pledge, others are doing the Concord Promise. But what I love about these programs, even more than delaying smartphone use, which is what a lot of these programs are about, which is super important, and everybody should delay getting a smartphone for their kid as long as they can hold out. But what I like particularly about these programs is that they get communities talking to each other. They get this is such a big issue that it's something that parents need to be talking to other parents about. When we parent together, we parent better. And one of the things that the marketing industry and the media industry has actually successfully done, I think, is treat media use like it's a personal issue. Like, how dare you want to talk to me about what goes on in my own home? And we've heard that from pediatricians, like parents getting angry at pediatricians, like, how dare you ask me about how media use is happening in our home? But this is a public health issue. This is a cultural issue. This is about what kind of community and what kind of cultures we want for ourselves. And so the more we can have parents talking to each other about their values, about what they want to see in kids, the stronger those communities will be able to be at resisting some of this.
And I think that public institutions, schools should be hosting programs for parents around these issues, libraries, faith communities. Faith communities could be a really great resource for not only limiting screen time, but also for addressing commercialism, which is antithetical to most of the religions that I know about. Thou shalt buy is not a commandment I've ever heard of.
Yeah, and I think I think when you come together as a community, it makes it much easier to resist some of this commercialism. So, for instance, it's a lot easier when you're the head of the campaign for commercial-free childhood. Nobody's probably going to buy my daughter a Barbie doll because they know what I do. But in her cohort of friends, the parents and I, we talk and we have some similar values, and so we're not worried about those presents showing up at birthday parties. And if you're having those conversations with relatives and they're understanding your values and you're not afraid of your values, right? I think something that happens with popular consumer culture is so pervasive that often we feel sheepish about not wanting to take part in it. Like, because we don't know what happened on the reality show last week. We shouldn't feel sheepish about that. We should feel proud about that. And the more we speak up and talk about that, the more we might find out that our neighbor feels the same exact way, and that we didn't even get to know each other all these years because we just were making assumptions that they were watching American Idol.
And I think none of us wants our kids to feel ostracized, and if we build that community of parents, then there's an automatic community for our kids as well, so that they can grow up with similar values.
It's hard to be the only one.
It is.
And I think seeking out people, however you can do it, who share your values is really important.
And I think we all think we're the only one because we're afraid to talk about it. It's like a taboo issue to talk about screen time, even though it's in the press all the time. So, Sam, do we have other questions from our viewers?
You bet we do. This question is from Corey, and Corey asks, Cyberwise Diana Graber asks, would you give your kids a car without teaching them how to drive? So, why do we give them technology without lessons?
Oh, who would like to take that one?
I think we do it because of marketing. Because these devices are marketed as must-haves, that your child will fall behind if they don't have them, and that they're so easy to use, that they don't seem like they need instructions, right? I mean, when a baby can swipe successfully and do this, why would you need to why would you need to do education with the child when you can hop on a device and be ordering something from Amazon or photoshopping this or doing that or posting to Instagram, without any lessons. So I think that part of it is the ease of use. And part of it is also the way these things have been marketed to. I mean, it's one of the things that just is mind-boggling to me, which I think is very similar to this question, is you get a phone, you get your first smartphone, and then you have it 24/7. Like, why, just because you have a new device, you own a new piece of equipment, why are you now connected to the internet every moment, every waking moment, and even probably some of the time that you're sleeping just because you have a new device? You could have a phone and you could only use it an hour a day, but nobody uses it that way, right? And so I think it's incredibly important that we teach kids how to use these things in ways that are productive and minimize as much as we can the negative stuff, and give them and then we don't just hand them the phone and say go wild, but we say, okay, here are the steps that we're going to take.
Yep. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was, I think that's fine. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to put in a plug for the network here, and we have authors and Diana Graber who just asked that question. CyberWise, please go see her website. Come to the network because we have great authors, great parent coaches that belong to the network. And I think what the question is getting to the heart of is, should we be teaching our kids how to interact with these things before we hand it over to them? And of course we should, but how do we know how to do that? And we have some great resources at the network.
Are there more questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course. Okay, this question is from Mary, and Mary asks, what can we do about schools, specifically high schools, that allow students to use their phones in the classroom?
Josh, why don't you take that one?
Sure. There's a lot of research, and you can find some of this research at the Action Network that shows that phones in the classroom is not surprisingly distracting students, and that I know test scores are not the end and end all of how we should measure kids, but one study came out recently, a meta-analysis that found that cell phones in the classroom were equivalent to a 5% drop in test scores, just because having that distraction. So I think
now we can just pay people to take those tests for our kids. So.
You can tell that this is live, right? We're working at current events. So I think showing that research, I think, can be really helpful. I think, part of it, one of the issues that comes up time and time again with taking cell phones away from kids in schools is that parents have a really hard time disconnecting from their kids during the day. They want to be able to reach them at all times. So I think there's a lot of education that we need to do with parents about how trusting our kids and disconnecting for our kids for 6.5 hours a day while they're at school is actually a really important thing to happen to them developmentally, not to mention if the shooter is in the building, and I don't mean to make light of shootings at all in any way, but there's not really anything you can do, and the last thing your kid should be doing is being on the phone with you. But I do think we need to work on that parent education piece, because parents believe that because they can be connected to kids 24/7, they should, and they should.
There's another thing. If you start out from early childhood with limiting the amount of time that kids spend on screens, being thoughtful about what they do on screens, ensuring that they have other things that are important to them, that they have the experience of having fun and joyful experiences without commercialism, they're going to have that body of experience when they become teenagers, and that will be helpful to them even if they attend a school, which schools shouldn't be doing that, but even if they attend schools where phones are allowed in the classroom, you have a better shot at having a child who does have a healthy balance around it when they're a teenager. If you've started with screen thoughtful, screen rules and screen limiting, when from the time that they're very young.
We've actually had some teenagers contact us at the network and say the best thing my parents ever did was limit my screen time. And so I think it does, pay now or pay later. It's definitely something that will benefit the kids, and they'll recognize it as well. Sam?
Okay, Helen brings up a very good point about this conversation. She says, another piece of this is that it is becoming almost illegal for kids to play outside without direct supervision due to Child Protection Service overreach. So parents don't or can't let kids out, and having them in all the time is much easier with digital stuff. no mess, no noise, no interruptions. So how would you respond to that?
I think I was thinking of that actually when we were talking about getting to know your community, get to know other families in the neighborhood, and make sure that those people know your kids, and that if a neighborhood is looking out for kids, that, you know, I think that is really helpful. There need to be more public parks. We need, as a country, you know, to spend more money on public play spaces for kids and places for kids, you know, to be able to go. I mean, the thought that kids can't, you know, walk around or go off by themselves is really sad. And I think what you said, I mean, it's an important part of development. And now we're reading about all these kids in college who don't know how to manage being on their own. So that's a really good point.
And I think that you know, we work very closely with Lenore Skenazy and the Free Range Children Movement and her new organization, Let It Grow. But I also think, you know, I personally, I grew up late 70s, early 80s when my childhood was, most of my free time right after school was spent playing outside, unsupervised, mixed age, neighborhood-based play, mixed gender play, kids taking care of each other, knowing where to go if something went, you know, knowing where the parents who were home were if something bad happened. And one of the interesting things about the childhood that I had, you couldn't really make a lot of money off of it. You know, we needed some baseball bats, a football, you know, don't need anything to play tag or hide and seek. And so, you know, I think part of what's been happened is parents have been marketed fear because there's a lot more money to be made off of fear than kids running around outside. And I think we need to recognize the extent to which, you know, and Let It Grow and Free Range Kids have all sorts of resources to show you how actually, you know, in the majority of neighborhoods, things have never been safer for kids to play outside. But again, parents have really been marketed fear because that's where the money is.
Also, with both parents working, parents are relying more on daycare or after school programs, and that makes it really important for those people running their program to provide time for free play, screen-free, commercial-free play, and not to rely on screens and tablets and whatever in the classroom or after school. I mean, so that even kids who, you know, don't have a neighborhood or can't run around in the neighborhood, at least when they're at daycare or after school programs, that's a place where they can have some freedom and, you know, learn to enjoy being with themselves and their friends and what they make up and create.
And I think that, you know, that free time to do, you know, for child-directed play and games is so important. Kids, you know, so the combination of a lot of kids being extremely overscheduled now with organized activities, and every moment that they're not in an organized activity is on a screen. And so we have, you know, either adult organized activity or screen time, and nothing organized by the kids themselves. And that's a huge, huge loss. And in fact, one of the things, I think maybe my favorite thing about Screen Free Week and the stories that we get is, you know, early in the week, the kids are complaining, and that's early in the week is when we recommend to parents that they have a lot of ideas for activities for the kids to do when they complain that they're bored. But as the week goes on, the kids start coming up with their own ideas. You don't have to keep feeding kids ideas. If you give them the time and space to be bored, kids are incredibly resilient at coming up with their own ideas, but we don't give them that time and space anymore.
And that's true with those indoor activities also. So Helen, if you are in a situation, or if the parents you serve are in that situation where the kids have to be inside, the childhood is messy. And if we allow those messes, it goes by fast. My kids are all in their 20s, there's no more mess. But if we allow the toys and the Play-Doh and the paints for them to be creative indoors, then that's supporting childhood as well. And I just want to say we're at the top of the hour, and so we're going to come to an official close. I just want to mention that our next webinar will be April 10th with Brooke Shannon and Dr. Natasha Burgett, and it will be on Wait Until 8th. It's a program that I know a lot of our members are very curious about, and why did they pick 8? They'll be explaining that to us and the pros and cons of it, but as a program that can really support some of our parents. And thank you for joining us if you have to leave, but Josh and Susan have agreed to stay with us for an extra 15 minutes for some questions. Sam, we'll go to our next question.
Okay, we have another great question. This viewer asks, could you share a moment from your own parenting experience that illustrates the joy of what you can discover when you're not wrapped up in commercialism?
Josh or Susan? Who would like to start?
I remember my daughter and a friend going through the kitchen and just mixing all of this, stuff up, just making, all of these things, on their own. I loved reading to my daughter. We used to read a lot together, and little kids really like poems, the rhythms of them, and that, that was really fun. Yeah.
I mean, my daughter is 10, and she still can pretend play with her stuffed animals or dolls for hours. She doesn't have any siblings, so she's frequently, if she doesn't have a friend over, she's playing by herself. And she's 10, which that's a wonderful age to be doing those things. But it seems like, because our culture puts so much pressure on kids to get older faster, like it seems like almost like she's engaged in this babyish behavior. Right? She should be on Instagram and Snapchat and wondering about, pop music and who's on what television show and who's cool and what's not and who's not. And she's not doing that yet. And I'm just enjoying every minute of that and wondering how much longer it can last. But it's lasted a lot longer because her values are not really shaped by the commercial values. She's doing what comes from within.
A great example from me as a parent was cardboard boxes and tape. As that one Christmas that we gave my son just a big box that had paper plates in it, little empty Kleenex boxes and tape, and he just spent hours and hours and made this huge creation and said, "Mom, guess what it is?" And I guessed a few things that I can't remember now. And then he said, "It's a Beanie Baby spaceship." And I think just giving them raw materials was just great.
The cardboard boxes, especially. I mean, I know people always said kids really like the cardboard boxes better than the present, and part of me was thinking, oh yeah, right,
Yeah.
But we did one when we were giving gifts one year with the grandchildren. Something came in a really large box, and they played with that box for months. I mean, really until it collapsed. They did all. They crawled in it. They punched holes in it. They colored it. They put stickers on it. It was great.
And I would say another thing that I think is wonderful is our board chair Nathan Dungan has this idea to give at the holidays. You give a share check. So what that is a check that you make out, and then you leave the to-field blank, and your child gets to pick what nonprofit they would like to give that money to. And for my daughter, thinking really hard, she just loves animals and wants to protect every animal in the world, and thinking really hard about where that money would be best spent, has really, like, that's what she's thinking about at Christmas. She's not thinking about, am I going to get the LOL doll? Maybe it's because she knows there's no way in hell she is. But that's what she looks forward to, along with the traditions of family and cooking and cookies and things like that at Christmas. Not what she's going to get. And it's a very simple thing, this idea of a share check, but it's really transformed our holidays.
Great idea. Sam, do we have other questions?
You bet we do. Okay, so Catherine says, the research is flush regarding the problems as a result of screens and social media. Mental health, attention, lacking emotional intelligence, distraction, access to porn, etc. However, the solutions seem slim. If you were to pinpoint a group to help, where would you start, and what might you offer as beginning help?
I would start with the Action Network and CCFC, but you guys go ahead.
You know, I would start there too. I mean, I think that first of all, I think we can't. It's really important to have interim goals and to celebrate progress. I was at a meeting, an organizing meeting for our Screens in Schools work group in the Action Network. So we have a group of 40 people who all volunteer, who are working together to create a toolkit to help parents get and teachers get better policies around media use in their schools. And because these are people who don't just want to make changes in their own home, they want to change the culture. And one of the activists in that group was telling me, you know, all the roadblocks that she had been come up against, and was pretty discouraged. And then she just happened to let slip in that conversation that as a result of her efforts, they had changed when they gave iPads to kids, every kid, from 2nd grade to 3rd grade. That's major. Now, obviously, we don't want the kid getting the iPad in 3rd grade. 4th grade or 5th grade or 6th grade would be better than 3rd grade. But 3rd grade compared to 2nd grade is pretty darn good. That's really something to celebrate. So I think part of what we have to do is we can't just look at the enormity of this problem that we face. And we need to look at what are the smaller changes that we can make, and how can we get there, and how can we make them, and how can we celebrate them and build on those. Because this one thing that this movement is desperate for is success stories. And there are a lot of success stories, but we don't tell them. We focus so much on, you know, because the horror stories, they sell better, right? So we talk about when we went out to dinner and we saw the family of 4 and they were all on 4 separate screens. And we should talk about that because that's really upsetting. And that family, you know, we need to help that family understand why no screen should be out at dinner and they should be talking to each other. But we also need to, when the iPad program moves back from 2nd to 3rd grade, we need to be screaming that from the mountaintops. And then we need to be showing how those kids in 2nd grade are doing awesome and they don't miss those iPads one bit. And then we can get them out of the 3rd grade too.
Yes, Josh, I think that Screens in Schools group is just a great example of people who can just come together and move something. I think for me it's getting to be when a family is sitting there having conversation with each other at the dinner table, then I say, oh, look at that, because we're so used to seeing the screens. But I can't sleep at night sometimes because I worry that this problem is too big, that there are too many facets to it. And I think that is a good reason why we come together as a network to say, what small chunks can we deal with today, this week, this month, that we can make a difference and start here. So
and also for parents, do less. I mean, you know, if you feel like you can't cut out screens entirely, do less. Think of times in your day. You know, for sure everybody says this, take them out, you know, no screens during dinner or during meals or, you know, whatever. So start that way.
And also understand that that marketers want you to think that your kid can't survive without screens. And so what I think is one of the most pernicious myths around screen time is that with young children is that we have 2 choices. We either hand them a screen or we're on the floor with them playing 24/7. You know, it's hard to be on the floor all the time. And I actually think, you know, that's a marketing myth. And in fact, we need to give kids time to be by themselves, even at young ages. Obviously, we want to make sure they're in a safe environment. They can't be around anything sharp that's going to hurt them, but we need to give them the time and space to be bored, to think up their own games, to use their own imaginations. And really this idea that none of us are capable of getting through the day without using the screens to get through these times is really, you know, what the marketers want us to believe.
Sam, do we have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, we have time for a few more questions. Okay, now Susan, you alluded a bit to this earlier, but Marissa asks, what are your thoughts about a family screen contract to outline rules and expectations around screen use?
I think that it depends on your family. what solution you find needs to work for your family. I mean, if you have really young kids, like 2, 3, a contract might be hard, but try it and see how it works. I don't think there's a right way to do this. I think, you need to know your family, your kids, your situation, and then, think about what might work for you.
And I think one of the nice things about family contracts with older children in particular is to create rules for parents,
Right.
which I think goes a huge way towards educating kids about responsible use and about the need to take breaks. Because if we're constantly telling our kids with our actions that our work emails and Donald Trump's tweets and what our Facebook friends are up to is more important than what our kids are doing right in front of us, of course they're going to absorb those messages. But I think, for me, the best family contracts are ones that are really family contracts. They're not just restrictions on kids. They're family agreements about where phones don't belong, where screens don't belong, about when we're going to take breaks, about when we're going to leave the phone home. When I give talks and I try to say, when I go out to dinner and I don't want to feel my phone calling me in my pocket, even if I'm not going to take it out. I leave it in the car, and people gasp like, "Oh my God, you leave your phone in the car?" But I mean, that's it's actually a pretty simple thing to do, and you will survive. Trust me. But I think that's one of the great thing about contracts is it's really about every member of the family. And if you want kids to learn, and you need to show that you're buying into this as well.
The most important gift we can give our children are our values. So.
Speaking of values, I love contracts that start with our values. So if a value to you is getting outdoors, if a value to you is spending time together, playing board games or reading, let's start with those things. And that really edges out the screen time anyway and helps you to limit it. And we're great partners with the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that's what their media plan does. You'll find that on the resource library. And it helps you to say, what other things are we doing? Maybe it's sports, maybe it's lessons, maybe it's spending time together as a family, and then what is left for screen time is minimal.
Okay, one final question. So shout out to Catherine, who mentioned her daughter enjoys a screen-free childhood, and her play continues to be imaginative and relaxing. So the final question I'd like to pose to you tonight is, what does a commercial-free childhood look like?
So, let me tell you what a commercial childhood looks like first. I was talking to a 4-year-old who she was wearing, a branded shirt, a branded skirt, and she had a branded lunchbox with 3 branded characters in it. So I was saying, she's a lovely little girl. I said, "Who's this?" And she said, "This is so-and-so." I said, where's this one from? And she told me. And then I said, "Well, where does this one live?" And she told me. And I got to the 3rd one. I said, "Where does this one live?" And she said, "I don't know. I haven't seen the program." So for me, a commercial-free childhood is one where children are free to be able to create and imagine and to spend time with themselves and to get enormous amounts of pleasure out of the things that they create alone with their families and with their friends.
And I would just add to that, I mean, when you tell people you work for the Campaign for Commercial-Free Childhood, you get used to people rolling their eyes and saying good luck with that because it sounds so far out. But really, one of the guiding ideas behind it is that the primary people and institutions that interact with children should have a child's best interest at heart. And whether that's a school or a pediatrician or a family or community or friends of family, but and one of the things that happens now is kids spend so much time, 4, 6, 8 hours a day with entertainment screen media, which isn't designed by people that have their best interests at heart. It's only designed to make money, and so when you look at it that way, a commercial-free childhood is where a child, the primary influences in their lives are people and institutions that care about the child. That's not so radical. That's not so far out there. I think most people would agree to that. And so, that's what it is to me. And it's a childhood where we value children for who they are and who they become, not what they're able to spend or what they're able to convince their parents to spend.
I think that's a great note to end on, is our imagining a commercial-free childhood together, because when we put it out there and we imagine it and start working toward it, that's when it's going to happen. I'd like to thank our presenters tonight, Josh Golin, Executive Director of CCFC, and Susan Linn, founder of CCFC. Thanks for being with us. Please join us again.